Hey there, my name is Brian, and this is 10 somatic healing techniques for the trauma journey. Now, before we get started with the techniques, I'd like to say two things. First, I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Ariel Schwartz, who wrote an article that really stimulated this video. Very interesting article, and I'm going to link that in the description. And I'd also like to ask you, if you're interested in this kind of content, please like and subscribe to this video. That will help spread it to other people who might be interested in this content and can maybe help them out. And so with that said, let's get started. So somatic healing techniques, what are we talking about with this? And I'd like to first say, why would we use a somatic healing technique? If you're on this video, you probably have an idea about why that might be. I'd like to just kind of verbalize some of my own reasons why I'm interested in this kind of material for myself and the people I work with. And that is sometimes as human beings, we can feel trapped by our thoughts and emotions, our physical and emotional states. And I think there's no reason to be overly evaluative and judgmental about how we're feeling and how we are at any state and time. However, generally, for myself and people I work with, we like to have some freedom about, okay, if I'm continually stuck in this certain state of being, I'd like to be able to have some agency and move from it every once in a while. And so one of the most helpful things I found to help me do this from some of the difficult feelings of depression I've had and crippling anxiety and fear is some of these somatic healing techniques, which we'll go through now. Okay, let's just get started with the first one. The first technique, which is grounding. And I think this technique of grounding is at the heart of any kind of somatic or body-based healing method, psychotherapy, etc. I was doing some of the research on this, very helped immensely by Dr. Schwartz's work. Alexander Lowen developed a great field called bioenergetics, and this is just talking about this grounding is perhaps talking about how we can feel ourselves as embodied beings. This maybe involves sensing the body, feeling our feet on the earth, etc. And it typically is related to calming the nervous system. Now, I'd like to say here, in this video, I'd like to add one caveat. In this video, I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving instructions on how to ground, but something I've learned from improvisational dance, which is a field that I love, is sometimes it can be nice to have some pointers before experimenting and playing with your own understanding of what grounding might mean for you personally in your unique context. So some ways I like to work with these techniques, especially grounding, is I might set an intention for myself. So that's one. I'm going to explore what it's like to be grounded. I might use my imagination to picture myself as a tree or something that I sense may have the experience of being grounded. And I also like to use sensations, as I already talked about. So feeling what my feet are like, for example, and maybe taking my hands and gently pushing down on my thighs are all things that I like to do. But I really encourage you to explore and play. And that leads us to our second technique, which is cultivating somatic awareness. Now, what I'm going to say here is a somatic healing process. It promotes whole body awareness. So sometimes, as we're exploring what our body's like, we might find some constrictions in the breath or patterns of tension in the body that are reappearing. And what I want to say here and what I'm learning in my own healing journey is that just becoming aware of this is a huge step. And that is something to not to sneeze at, to use an American idiom. Just finding an awareness of, hey, when I sit down to meditate or whatever, I have trouble breathing in this place, or it really hurts in this area, or it feels constricted. That's a huge accomplishment and a great thing to discover that promotes healing. The third technique I'd like to talk about is resourcing. This is a really, really cool one. Okay, so when we are focusing on the process of developing resources or using this resourcing technique, it's essentially what we're trying to do is identify people who we hang out with or around, times in our life, places that have helped us feel safe, calm, at peace, maybe joyful, things that we might have a preference for in our life. And what resourcing allows us to do is kind of check in with those times and maybe feel what it was like what it feels like in the body. What is it like to feel at peace? And perhaps as we, in another set of language we can use from the focusing modality, we can get like a handle. We can get a felt sense for what it's like to be peaceful. And then perhaps sometimes when we're not in those places, we can have an ability to invite some peace into our life by remembering these feelings. So resourcing is essentially the process of developing a felt sense of peace. And if you have made it this far into the video, I'd like to invite you to our Facebook group where, so a little bit more about me. What I do is I facilitate peer-to-peer mutual aid groups. They're completely free. We work through this kind of material in a group, and we'd love to have you. So check out our Facebook group. That's the best way to figure out more information. The fourth technique, let me make sure I have that right. Yep, the fourth technique is titration, which is a weird word, but I like to think of it as blending. And this is when we turn our attention. So we just focused on the resourcing technique. This is a great thing to work with after that, and it's called blending. So maybe we do have some traumatic memories or some stuck places or some things that aren't feeling really good. Maybe we found some of those constricted breathing patterns or tension. And essentially what we can do is experience a small amount of the overwhelm or the distress associated with our traumatic memories and or the tension and discomfort, while kind of bouncing back to our peace or to a neutral sensation. Like sometimes I'll use a sensation in my feet, and I have a big rock. Sometimes for some of the healing work I'm doing, it feels like there's a big stone in my stomach. So I'm on the healing journey for disordered eating, and so I have some issues with the stomach, and so I'll explore that, and it can be really scary. But then after experimenting with that for 30 seconds, I'll go to something neutral, or if it starts to get really scary, I'll go to some of my inner resources. And going back and forth can be a great way to kind of blend these and allow us to circle around some of these more problematic aspects that we're working with, and in a really safe, comfortable way. Next, I'd like to go to the fifth technique, which is staying descriptive. Now, if we have experiences in talk therapy and even some of the earlier somatic therapists or the people who work with these techniques, that we wanted to do interpretations. Maybe you've even worked with the chakra systems or something like this, and many systems will have very kind of explicit interpretations for what sensations or issues in certain areas of the body mean. And if we're working with this technique, these kind of somatic techniques, we want to stay descriptive instead of trying to explain what's going on. And so instead of making those interpretations, we can just notice the sensations and try to use descriptive words such as it feels hot, it feels tingly, it feels dull, it feels cold, and use that register. Okay, number 6. From there, we can use a technique called Deepening Awareness. Now, once we've become aware of some of these sensations or attention pattern, we can deepen the experience by kind of amplifying the sensations. For example, perhaps we have a tingling sensation in the chest area and the heart. We can kind of surrender to it. We can focus our breath, so I can close my eyes and kind of pretend like I'm breathing from it. I can kind of surrender to the sensation and allow it to really expand. And sometimes I like to add a sound or maybe a movement. As I'm making this video, I'm moving a lot because that feels really good to me. And this is something I read a lot from the article as well. It's fun, it's great to deepen, but we also want to stay safe. And we don't need to create any overwhelm or really go full speed ahead because there's no rush. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6. This is number 7. Sequencing. This is a fun one. So when tension in the sequencing technique, as tension in our body begins to release or move or change or discharge is sometimes used, it often feels like, this is kind of anecdotal, but there's a lot of qualitative evidence about this. Emotions and sensations, it seems like they're moving into different parts of the body. And so like tension in the belly could move to the chest, and to the chest could move to the head, from the feet. It's very, very interesting to experiment. Sometimes people can tremble, and typically we might have like a cathartic experience with some tears, or maybe some freed up breathing and a feeling of lightness. And that's what we call sequencing. Number 8, related to this, is the idea of movement and process. And this is really talking about how somatic healing techniques can help us listen to the story that our body tells. And, many things we do outside of our language, we can learn a lot about ourselves, get a lot of insight by our postures, what kind of gestures we're making, the way we take up or refuse to take up space. Speaking of that, sometimes I get the impulse to crouch or cower or hide, that's okay. We could maybe mindfully engage in these, and maybe they're defensive or something like that. They could be really important. And so, in my healing journey, as I kind of surrender to these experiences, sometimes I'll get an impulse to go out after that. And it could change. And there could be a process from that initial impulse. And that can be really important to play around with and explore. And sometimes it leads to calm. Okay, this is a good one. I've really, really enjoyed working on this one in my healing journey. Number 9, which is boundary development. One of the great things about this is the somatic healing techniques is there's a lot of focus on mindfulness and presence. And what's amazing is that sometimes we have changing needs from moment to moment. And this really gives us an opportunity to say yes and no, because something that was a yes can turn into a no, and something that was a no could turn into a yes, and in just a session of your own healing. And when I say a yes and a no, it could be like, maybe I want to dance right now, or maybe I really don't want to dance right now. Maybe I want to speak right now, or maybe I really don't want to speak right now. And that's great, but that could shift as well. And so learning that process, I think for me, has had enormous implications for outside of my healing sessions. As I take a drink before we go to the last one. And so, yes, number 9, boundary development. Okay, and then lastly, thanks everyone for sticking with me. Self-regulation. A lot of what we're learning in neuroscience is talking about how we respond to stress and trauma has a lot to do with our ability to soothe and regulate ourselves in the moment. So if something was incredibly overwhelming or chronically overwhelming, that's a huge detriment to our well-being. And so one thing we can do is kind of train ourselves, for lack of a better term, or this is the word I want to use. Yeah, I guess so. Maybe I want to say not train, but like helping ourselves respond in new ways to stress, and helping ourselves stay kind of present to emotions, big emotions, scary emotions, to understand just what's going on. How is this a time where I really do need to run away or fight, or is this a time where I could learn to regulate what's going on and stay with it if it's actually not a really dangerous situation, even though a similar situation in the past may have been. And so this process of self-regulation and kind of learning and opening up to the journey of learning what is safe in our lives and what isn't, especially when we've experienced things that were really, really not safe, and we're kind of reacclimating to a new world where that is always a reality, but we also don't want to be defined and restricted by that. This is a technique that we can think of as staying mindful and present to our emotions, and really understanding what they mean for this time and place. And so with that said, we've talked for about 15 minutes. Thank you so much for staying with me. If you enjoyed this, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what technique you like the best, and if you'll try any of them. I hope to see you over in the Facebook group, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.